the new SEC.
Week 14 recap. This is a new SEC podcast. Rivalry week just happened and it was absolute chaos. I'm Randall Ledet Jr. We got Hunter Zeisman here, and it was an incredible week in the SEC, an incredible week across the nation. Fights galore. Everyone was ready to squab up, and we saw some good results in the SEC. We saw some good results outside the conference. Ohio State getting stunned in the big game. Georgia going 8 overtimes against Georgia Tech on Friday night. Tulane going down Thursday night to Memphis. It was just an upset weekend and a lot of great games. And so, Hunter, what were some things you took away from this weekend?
Yeah, a lot of flag planting, a lot of people going to plant the flag. I know Baker Mayfield would be proud of all of that. And I like that, the team saying if you had 60 minutes to fight, so that way they didn't do it. But no, it was a good week. Some big takeaways. The conference games are set now, and it's kind of some teams that maybe weren't expected to play. Penn State sneaking in there for the Big Ten championship game. Still, we're here on Sunday night. There's really no telling who's going to be in the playoffs still. Like, teams have, some good odds, some not. It's really up in the air who's going to make it. So the week didn't really bring much clarity to it.
It really didn't bring too much clarity. I think, it might have punched the ticket for Penn State and for Oregon. It helps us see the picture clearer for the Mountain West between UNLV and Boise State. But it brought a lot of chaos. Clemson was able to backdoor their way into the conference championship after losing to South Carolina. Big ups to South Carolina. You Gamecock fans, you always tune in, so appreciate y'all. But Clemson was able to back their way into the ACC championship playing SMU. So that's going to be a home game for them in Charlotte, most likely, with SMU having to travel from Dallas. But not a ton of clarity was brought this week outside a couple of those outcomes.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see where they put Miami. AP poll dropped them pretty far, but Miami losing to Syracuse is a big one for, they're a 2-loss team. Where do they end up? Is it going to be in front of some of the 3-loss teams like Alabama or South Carolina? I have no clue.
I have no clue. And I looked at the AP poll this past today. I mean, we're recording here on Sunday, but this weekend, and I feel like they got it kind of right. I mean, a lot of the teams, the way they're stacked, are teams that beat teams. Bama obviously sitting at 12 above South Carolina. That's been the buzz on social media. Should South Carolina be higher? They've won 6 straight, but Alabama holds the almighty H2H head-to-head.
Yeah, I think it's going to matter. I think that's why they're sitting where they're at. We saw them use that justification multiple times in the rankings this year, but they haven't lived and died by it. They've had a couple times where they've flip-flopped teams because of how they had looked at the time, and it's no real surprise that South Carolina looks stronger than Alabama, even though they lost the head-to-head 7 weeks ago.
Yeah, it's true. It's definitely true. And so for the most part, all of our championship games, and really all of them, are all set, right? We got the ACC championship game set, Clemson versus SMU. We got the Big 12 championship game set. It's going to be Iowa State versus Arizona State. We got the SEC championship, Texas clinching, big win for them over A&M. And we're going to talk about that more in depth here on this episode. But Texas clinching their spot into their first ever SEC championship, coming off of a Big 12 championship, taking on Georgia. Georgia was in a dogfight. We talked about it earlier, but the results of that game was not going to impact them playing this upcoming week in Atlanta. But they're looking to avenge their SEC championship loss last year and win the SEC this year to get that first round bye. And in the Big Ten, we got Oregon and Penn State. So another really heavyweight matchup. I'm excited to see that one. I'm excited to see Penn State have a second test. I don't know if Penn State wanted that test. They were already kind of locked into the playoffs. And so Ohio State kind of gifted them with, hey, here you go. Here's Oregon. Yeah. Because if Ohio State won, they would have been playing Oregon this week again.
Yeah, and they still kind of locked it. I think their odds are like at 96% or something crazy of making it Ohio State, even though they lost. It almost maybe benefited them, not playing, take a week at home. But, outside of the major Power 4 conferences, the Thursday night Memphis-Tulane game was a big one too, because now Tulane losing that game pretty much means that the winner of the Boise State UNLV game this upcoming weekend will get that G5 spot. So UNLV could sneak in.
UNLV could sneak in, and UNLV, they have been able to have a good season. They played Boise State pretty close this year. I think it was 24-21. I think the main story for them was losing their starting quarterback amid some of these NIL, reservations that he was supposed to get 100K or more. It doesn't matter. The running Rebels are still running. Their OC is one of the hottest OCs in the country, and they got a chance to take down Ashton Genty, which is a very tall task that many teams have not been able to stop. or slow down. And for this episode, we're going to talk more about some of these teams around the country, like we mentioned. We're going to do a rivalry week rundown, quick game by game thoughts and reactions, all 10 of them, and then we'll do our SEC power rankings. And so, we'll talk about where we think teams like South Carolina stand. Where do you put A&M after a loss? Where do you put Florida after a dub and sitting at 7-5 now? A lot to talk about in terms of the power rankings and what it means for bowl season, what it means for championship season, and what it means for going into the offseason for a lot of these programs. And then we'll wrap up, of course, with around the country. So talk more about some of the results that we highlighted on and what that means for conference championship weekend.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff to talk about, and it's end of season. So, while there's a lot of teams going bowling, there's still some teams where this is the wrap for the season. So they're looking ahead. But to get into some of the rivalry games, it never feels right when the SEC is playing on a weeknight. They're usually reserved for Saturday, but we had a couple of Friday night games. The first one being the Egg Bowl, Mississippi State, Ole Miss. Game started out kind of strong for Mississippi State. I thought, they had a good shot. It seems kind of like the same game they played all year, where they keep it close, but ultimately the other team takes it. But Ole Miss taking this one a little bit closer than expected.
Definitely a little bit closer than what they expected. We got to ultimately see a pretty good game coming from Van Buren in this one. Jackson Dart was looking to get, his last game probably for Ole Miss and to take the Egg Bowl. When I was watching this one, some things that stood out to me, which is Ole Miss being able to control the game from a rushing attack perspective, but they weren't necessarily able to fully bottle Mississippi State until about the end of the game.
Yeah. Yeah. And Mississippi State was getting down there. They just couldn't get in the end zone. Like they had opportunities to score. Yep. A couple of mistakes, but you got to feel like going forward for Mississippi State, even though they didn't have a very successful season, Levy will still be there. Van Buren hopefully will still be there. They have the 27th best recruiting class for next year, even with that record. So hopefully everything's on the up and up for them.
It looks pretty good, right? A couple weeks ago, we saw the story of the guy that was looking at decommitting from Mississippi State. That's not affecting their recruiting class, as you mentioned. You got to hope that Van Buren comes back for next year. Maybe you get another good receiver in the portal, like you did with Kevin Coleman, and you might be in a good spot going into next year.
Yeah, and for Ole Miss, like they're pretty much all but eliminated from the playoffs. I think there's like 3% chance per ESPN of getting in, but end of Dart's year, he might play in the bowl game depending on what happens with them. But Austin Simmons, we got to see him a little bit this year. So we'll see what Lane Kiffin can do with them next year. But it was a good end to the season for these two teams.
Definitely a good end to the season. I'd have to imagine it's pretty bittersweet for Ole Miss. Just, you hope to find yourself in the playoffs. They're kind of in that first four out right now, according to a lot of, like On3 or an ESPN. Some big wins. You cross the big barrier beating Georgia this year. Obviously tough losses to Kentucky. And a big win against South Carolina now, right? But just good way to go out. Good for Jackson Dart. I think he passed, the Manning's all-time passing record or passing yards for a career this past week. And so good for them. Get ready to learn Texas Bowl, most likely. But still a good season for Ole Miss overall.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the other game on Friday night, that was about 5 hours long. Georgia Tech, Georgia, 8th overtime. Before we get into the game, I got to say the overtime rules, I don't like the 2-point conversion process. I like them going back, having to run the short end of the field. But overall, it is exciting to watch.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. I think there's a happy medium here. Instead of it being, one attempt to get the 2-point conversion, maybe you just do 1st and goal from the 10. Like if you're trying to eliminate the amount of football that's being played and having them go from the 25-yard line and do get the first down, get a field goal, get a touchdown, just do 1st and goal from the 10, right? And have them and give them 4 downs. That changes how you call plays. You're probably not getting as thin on the playbook. And to me, it's more worth it if you're going to play 60 minutes than to have these free throw shot like attempts when it comes to winning a game in overtime. Because to me, it's like if you're watching a basketball game and you play 4 quarters and they say, hey, instead of doing overtime for 5 minutes, we're just going to do a free throw challenge and you got to match the other person's free throw. It doesn't seem like a fair way to determine a winner, personally.
No, and I love run game, running the football, and teams when they only have one shot, 3 yards out, they're a little hesitant to take that on take a running play to do that. Georgia 1-on-1. When you see a team like Georgia Tech, who a lot of the game they had the QB run going, using his legs, it's tough to get that going when you're in such a short confined space. But
Yeah.
either way, I think Georgia is the better team in this game. So I think the better team did win in Georgia punching their ticket. It does feel like the Georgia team of, the Clemson game, of the Texas game, maybe isn't the same team that we're seeing, at least defensively. So I'm very interested to see who shows up for the Texas game this week.
Yeah, I think, for Georgia, they're kind of their one challenge on defense this year has been stopping the run, and that's what Georgia Tech was able to do in this game. I mean, a lot of hate in the hate game, as they call it. Shout out to Brent Key, obviously coached a great game. Alabama, former on the staff there, obviously Georgia Tech alum. Haynes King balled out over 300 yards. It felt like they controlled the majority of the game. This Georgia team, and I tell my friends, they're just resilient, and I'm not just saying that because they came back and won. They're a team that, although they have not put together a full 4 quarters and some say for a while, they always find a way to stay in a game, be resilient. They're hard to it's like playing a final boss in a video game. It is very hard to take them down. And that's what we saw in this game. Like when people talk about how strong the SEC is, to me, this is what it means, where it's like, yes, there's more parity this year. You can hang against teams like this, but the size and the endurance and just like the will is what empowers a team like Georgia to be able to stay until the end. You saw it against Bama. Being able to come back and have a lead with, less than 2 minutes, it's hard to just, put them in the final spot. And that's where Georgia wins games like this.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a couple plays here and there, near the end of the game that could have gone one way or another, depending on which team you were a fan of and what you saw from the ref's eyes. But Carson Beck is playing a lot better as of the past few games than he did early on. I think he's not getting a ton of help from certain players on the team. It's a little bit of inconsistency from the receiving core, but they're going to play. They're pretty much a lock for the playoffs at this point. They're going to play this Saturday against Texas. Right now, Texas is a 1.5 favorite, which Georgia beating them down in Austin. Now, Texas. Now they're getting points again now in Atlanta. So I think it says something to how Vegas and honestly, kind of how I've been talking about them. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like this a little bit of a slide defensively from what they looked like earlier this year.
There's definitely been a slide defensively from what we've seen. We saw that in the Mississippi State game. We saw it in the game against Tech on Friday night. UMass even, right? Like it's like in the best defensive performance they've had of late has been that Tennessee game. And we understand Tennessee's offensive struggles in some capacities, but for Georgia, it has been the defensive side, taking that slide back. We talked about it. Offensively, you got to feel good with what you have with Nate Frazier, in this game, over 70 yards. I think Etienne has kind of been unavailable for a good amount of the season, but you got to feel good with this committee system, what you have with Nate Frazier and the Robinsons as well in the rushing attack.
Yeah. So they'll keep going. We'll see more of Georgia. They're not going anywhere.
Yeah, we'll definitely see more of Georgia, and they'll be playing here in the championship here on Saturday. Another team in the conference had a pretty big win on Saturday. South Carolina taking down Clemson. Big win for them. They jumped from 16 in the AP to 15 in the AP. We'll see what they come into the CFP. Absolute just great game from Lenora Sellers. Kate Klubnik played pretty solid on the Clemson side as well, so that was probably a tough loss. But thoughts from that game?
Lenora Sellers is that guy.
He's him.
Yeah. I mean, the turnovers early on in the season, we didn't know what we were going to get from him throughout the stretch. He turned into somebody that's super consistent for the team. Almost equal on the passing and the running, 164 on the ground, or 164 in the air, 166 on the ground. But I think the key for him was the 18 broken tackles. I don't know if you saw that floating around, but no players had more broken tackles than him this year in a game other than Ashton Genty. So he's got running back style numbers. You can't bring him down. Down the stretch of that game, I mean, he put it on his back.
Yeah. Those 2 rushing touchdowns at the end to help them get that lead. I think they had 10 points in the fourth quarter. You talk about those 18 broken tackles. That's paired with averaging over 10 yards a carry. When he gets going, it's hard to take him down. It's hard for him to fall backwards. Even when he gets stopped, it's like he's still upright. He's not really getting tackled, and he has become this anchor piece for the team. It's crazy to think that for a lot of power rankings, Lenora Sellers started off at 16th overall out of all 16 quarterbacks, behind Blake Shapen, formerly a Blake Shapen podcast, behind a lot, like behind Brock Vandegrift. And now he's got this team who's winning 6 straight games. and he is the anchor of this rushing attack alongside Raheem Sanders.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people would say this. I may say it too. This is a team that, if they found themselves in the playoffs, could compete with any team on there because of some of those more resilient style plays, like hard to bring the quarterback down because the O-line didn't necessarily play that well. They were getting to him often, quickly, but he was able to get out of it using keeping his eyes downfield, delivered some good balls. And the defense did well on their side too. At
Yep.
certain time, I was questioning it because Clemson was finding some soft spots. Cade Klubnik had a good game.
Yeah.
South Carolina did turn the ball over 3 times. 0 points scored off of those 3 turnovers for Clemson. So South Carolina defense came out and made sure that even if they gave up some yards here and there, they got off the field.
That was the story of the game, right? If you look at the box score, the stats are more or less even. Like South Carolina had the ball about 30 minutes, and Clemson had 29 minutes. South Carolina had 2 turnovers. Clemson had 3. They both were about 7 for 14 or 15 when it comes to third down. I mean, it was a pretty even game. It was just the stops that were made for South Carolina when Clemson found themselves at the 40-yard line, driving towards the end zone. Big turnover at the end in that game to kind of help seal it. And Cade played well. Cade's come a long way this season. The other side is what they were able to do with stopping the rushing attack, right? They held Phil Moffitt, I think, about under 50 yards. That was a major key when it comes to making Clemson one-dimensional in this game and having to rely on that passing game to beat them. Your guy, Humaniori, I feel like every time I was watching plays, you'd see him right near the ball. Like he's like DJ Swearinger reincarnated.
Yeah, it's tough to get things going after catch or, in college, there's so many passes, behind the line of scrimmage, even screens is just a common play style. But against South Carolina, it's so difficult because of the high IQ defensively of those guys swarming, getting to the ball. So it's tough to do anything against this team. A lot of teams have struggled with it. And if you take the Ole Miss game off of their resume, you have the 2-point loss to Alabama. And then you have an LSU game that was essentially just a bad hit away from them winning that game. So this team does have a great resume. ESPN saying about 21% chance to make the playoffs. I think that's more down to being unsure what the committee thinks about their resume. I think that they're going to be just sitting outside when it's all said and done, but they've put on a great fight down the home stretch of trying to make it.
Definitely put on a really great fight and a lot to look forward to. I think I saw Shane Beamer tied the win total with Steve Spurrier in the same amount of seasons. And so, the Beamer hype is real, like why they love him out there in Columbia. And you got to feel good about the season. He was, campaigning for his team to make the playoffs when asked in the press conference. And I would do the exact same thing if I was him. They have a strong resume. It's tough. You're looking for teams ahead of you to lose. If an Iron Bowl loss would have been really helpful for them when it comes to making that case between them and potentially Miami or BYU and some of the other teams competing for that. Seems to be the last spot outside of conference champs and everyone else.
Yeah. Moving to another team that is locked into playoffs. But go Gamecocks as a final thing. I think that they could be in. If they get in, they can make some waves. But the Tennessee Volunteers took care of business. That was one that some teams were looking at for maybe paving their way into the playoffs. If Vanderbilt could upset Tennessee, did the teams jump them early on? Vanderbilt was coming out hot, returned the kickoff, kept it going. I know you texted me. You're like,
eyeballs.
Eyeballs. Like, what's happening here? So, it was a good start. It just wasn't super sustainable.
Yeah, I mean, Vanderbilt, it really was a story of the first quarter, right? You come out, you get 17 points. Tennessee shut that down real quick. It was probably about 6 minutes to 8 minutes left in the second quarter, and Tennessee was able to get a couple scores. It was one of those things where the defense took over, and kind of the kryptonite for Vanderbilt this year has been their defense, and it allowed for Nico to have probably one of his best games of the season, 4 touchdowns, right? Over 200 yards. That was it was a good impression for the committee for a pretty decent exam going into not playing next week to me.
Yeah, I think it was probably the best offensive performance from them that maybe we've seen this year. Like they won the big game against Alabama, but there were some faults there offensively. This felt like a team that could make waves in the playoffs. Whereas before, it felt like they were getting by based on Dylan Sampson or getting by just on defense. It looks a little bit more complete. And now that they're a lock for the playoff, they're probably a lock for home field advantage too. So having to play a playoff game in Knoxville is a little tough, I would imagine.
It's definitely gonna be a tough one. You're gonna hear a lot of, Rocky Ta, all that going on, and Pat McAfee does a better rendition of that song than I, so I'm gonna save that for him. But it'll be rocking and rolling if they get a home game there, and I think they deserve it, right? They're sitting there. It's that third SEC team after this win against Vandy. You didn't play with your food. You did something that Alabama couldn't do. You beat Vanderbilt. And it was a pretty convincing win. Got to feel good about Nico, Dylan Sampson, 178 yards. I think a Doak Walker, snub. Honestly, I don't understand how he's not in contention for that award or wasn't a finalist. But he showed something to the people that vote for that. Because if I had a vote, I would definitely have him be a finalist for sure.
Yeah, he should be up there as a finalist. Still, just a great season for him. I think he's kind of carried a lot of the offensive load for this team all season. Now that the offense from the passing game is stepping in a little bit more, it was against Vanderbilt, who's been traditionally easy to pass against this year. It still says something. It's a good final resting game for them now as they go into trying to prepare for whatever team it might be. If it is going to be an Indiana or, Boise State, maybe, depending on who's there playing against them. So
whoever plays against them is going to have to battle against this defense. This team was only held, Vanderbilt to 6 points but from the second to the fourth quarter. That's been the story. Even when they lost to Georgia, the defense played okay. We'll see what they can do in the playoffs. I'm not on the committee, but if they make it, which the resume looks to be pretty penciled in, this defense is going to help them a long way in the playoffs. And we saw that against Vanderbilt on Saturday.
Yeah. Kentucky. We got to talk a little bit about Kentucky.
We got to. Let's do it.
It's like the sore spot, I guess, in the rundown. Poor performance from them against Louisville. They went with the freshman quarterback. He struggled a little bit to start out the game. I think he didn't have a completion until 13 minutes into the game. So all around a tough into the season for them, a tough run for the season when the expectations were maybe a little bit higher than how it all came out.
Definitely a tough one, right? You'd like to win more than one conference game. You'd like to win, a game like Auburn. Obviously, you got one of your biggest wins in school history, beating Ole Miss. You play, Georgia down to the wire. But what's going to be remembered is that in that 1-7 conference record, that is what's going to really hold you back when it comes to recruiting and retaining guys like Barry and Brown and like Macklin and such. And Louisville's had a good season, so they're a good team. They made Tyler Slaw look like he should be a Heisman candidate, but they're a good team. For Kentucky, my question was, where do you go here with Stoops?
Yeah. Because it feels like the pieces were there, especially defensively with this team that just didn't perform this year. So you have to have some questions. It's not a matter. I think early on he had some complaints about resources and stuff, if I'm remembering correctly, in a conference about all that. And it's like, you had pieces. Yeah, I mean, you had pieces there defensively to do better, and they played well in some games, like the Georgia game, for example. But it wasn't consistent. The offense wasn't consistent. I think that was kind of a quarterback play, O-line play thing at times. But now, you can't have O-linemen dressed or not. You can't have them getting hot dogs mid-game at the concession stand and expect to have good culture for your team. I think that's a coaching thing right there.
Yeah. Look, I even in middle school football, I wasn't getting hot dogs at halftime. Maybe post game. I'm 6'5". I had about 2-3 hot dogs, but but yeah, that's not going to help the culture. And it's unfortunate because like I talked about when you said resources, I thought about NIL. And the basketball team has the resources. Like they're typically a top 25 team every year. It's Kentucky basketball, right? I think that they have those resources on the football side. They probably would get more if they won more. And this was the first season where they didn't win the games that you would expect them to win. Like I said, the Auburn and some of these other teams in conference. They did a good job winning the out of conference games, but I mean, you're playing Southern Mississippi. That should be a win. I don't think all the blame goes on the quarterback play. I think it is, like you mentioned, the O-line. Just that was the crux for them when it comes to getting sacked a good amount. So I don't know where you go from here. It's a tough one because even in their worst years, they've typically found a way to win this game.
Yeah, it's been a little while since Louisville's beat them in this game, so it's a disappointing one for them, a disappointing season. You see where they'll go from here. They got young guys on the roster for quarterback. They didn't play well this weekend, but you hope maybe you can coach him up for next year. Go get somebody if you got the resources for it,
Yeah.
and see what happens with them.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll definitely see. I think they should be looking and considering evaluating the coaching positions. I'll put it that way.
Yeah,
I think it's time.
We can kind of maybe keep that same conversation going on here in a second with another team. Arkansas and Missouri played snow game in Columbia. I think it was a decent showing from both sides. Missouri getting the win though at home.
Yeah, definitely a decent showing for both sides, and this is, I think, the battleground rivalry, or the state line rivalry. So these two states touch. Snowy game, one of several games that had snow this weekend. Some we saw in the Big Ten. Good showing from both teams. It's kind of the same story on the Arkansas side. Taylor Green had another turnover. Jaquindon Jackson had a good game, 2 touchdowns, if I'm not mistaken. And then, for Missouri, they just did just enough to win. We saw a good performance from Marcus Carroll. Brady Cook was able to get two TDs in the air. I just think that they were just a better team in this game, and that's kind of what we saw here. Same story for Arkansas. What stuck out to you for Arkansas?
For Missouri? Arkansas, yeah, I mean the turnovers have just kind of been one of those things this year where no matter how good they're playing, they tend to turn over the ball. They tend to put the ball on the ground. Jaquindon Jackson had one. Taylor Green had one. It's unfortunate that things have gone that way for them this year, because it was a team that when we did our beginning of the season preview and as we started the year, we're like, this is a team with potential. It's a team they're better than their record shows. They're better than the record shows. And they continue to just not win games.
Yeah.
And when you're, looking at the talent on the field, you're looking at the potential that they have. Now the coach didn't go out there and strip the ball and fumble and do this and that. But at a certain point, like we talked about with Kentucky, I think that Arkansas is another team, 5 years in, you got to start evaluating the coaching position.
You have to, especially in this era where you see teams, get it together in a year or two with Indiana and Colorado. And obviously it's the SEC, so it's different. It's not as easy to plug in and play. I think it's time to make that look around, whether it's in-house with Travis Williams or Bobby Petrino, or it's outside of the house, right? This would be the most coveted job opening right now in terms of Power 4 openings. Right now, we got UNC, we got Purdue, we got UCF. This would be the
Virginia,
in West Virginia, other Power 4 opening. This would be the premier opening, hands down. Yeah. When I think about Arkansas, it's just, you had such a good win. You see the potential of the program when you beat Tennessee, but then you get mollywopped by Ole Miss, you get mollywopped by LSU. You play a close game with Missouri, you're supposed to be at the same level of Missouri to me as a program. Yeah. You have enough history where you're about where Missouri should be at.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, the season boils down, they're bowl eligible. It's great. But the season essentially boils down to some games that you were really just supposed to win because the teams were bad, and then a win versus Tennessee. That's kind of what you're hanging your hat on this year, being as a win versus Tennessee. So it didn't pan out entirely the way that they wanted to. Now it's not disappointing. I wouldn't say maybe disappointing from a fan perspective. It's probably on the low end of expectations. But I think the coaching position, I was looking into it a little bit. Sam Pittman, interestingly, has a buyout structure that's based on win percentage. So his buyout changes based on win percentage. So if he won this game and wins the upcoming bowl game, it would not only keep him in job because of, maybe you're winning games, but it also keeps him there because now all of a sudden it costs more to get him out.
Financial security.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So them losing these games not only puts him on the hot seat, but also makes it easier to buy him out.
Yeah, and the bowl games can be tough, right? With what we've seen historically with the portal, a lot of the top guys have typically, looked to go to other schools. Obviously, it's not all top guys leaving, and I don't know who's going to leave or stay from the portal for Arkansas, but it seems to be a theme where some of the guys don't play in these games. So we'll see, right? I think the big thing to hang your hat on, Jaquindon Jackson had a good season. I don't know if they're going to have him next year. But, Taylor Green, I still think should be an open competition, but he's a good piece to bring back from a quarterback perspective.
Yeah. And I want to flip it to Missouri. I show them a little bit more love because,
let's do it.
Reflecting. Yeah. Reflecting on them. I mean, the running back position previewing the year was one of the question marks. Can they replace Cody Schrader? And they had some shoes to fill there. And, the offense was lackluster at times in the passing game, but the running attack was always something that was strong. And in this game was just another example of that in the snow where you need it.
Yeah.
so they excelled in the running back room, not only in this game, but on the year. So kind of as an end of season wrap up, it just feels like that's a position that hopefully, as they continue to progress that position, some players want to go play at Missouri because of what they've been able to do in developing running backs.
Yeah, and you talked about it earlier in the season. The O line has really been kind of what's carried their rushing attack. This was a good game for them. When I think about Missouri's full season, I would say it's a good season just because they beat all the teams they're supposed to beat. They might not have been as competitive in the games that were more of those stretch games, the games that if you're going to hold that that number 6 ranking you had to start the season off, you had to beat A&M, you had to beat Alabama. They didn't show and look impressive in those games, but you finish the season off 9-3. You win your rivalry game for the second year in a row. Brady Cook's one of the better quarterbacks to come out of this program. And you have a good recruiting pitch where you say, hey, like, we're just getting started as a school. And another thing stood out to me was just for Theo Weiss transferring in from Oklahoma, he earned himself some money this year, right? This is the second season playing for them. He kind of almost became their guy. Like Burden was there as well, obviously, but Theo Weiss seemed to be the guy, and obviously played a pretty good game in this game as well.
Yeah, so good for them. I mean, both these teams are going to go bowling. It's going to be more to look forward to for them. So we'll keep tabs on that. But another game, same time, Iron Bowl, Auburn, Alabama.
Yeah.
Alabama winning by 14. Auburn was talking before the game. A lot of talk. Maybe too much talk for how the Auburn team has been this year so far. But it wasn't the prettiest win.
It wasn't the prettiest one, right? The scoreboard looks a little more like favorable to Alabama, but if you watch this game, it was pretty close going into half. I think they had like a 4-point lead going into half, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Milroe, he did what he does, and when they do win, he's running the ball, 3 touchdowns on the ground. What did you think about the game plan for Alabama? We saw a lot more carries for Jam Miller and Justice Haynes in this game than we did last game.
Yeah, I think that right as the game started, I saw them start touching the ball. I'm like, okay, they're picking up on that. You got to put the ball in their hands. I mean, Milroe still did a lot on the ground, 2 fumbles, threw a pick. Like, the turnovers are not there. Alabama is not playing their best football. All in all, I like the game plan a little bit. It does feel like Ryan Williams' back half of the season's been a little bit of a slide. Like, it's not the same electricity that the first half had. You had that one taken off last week against Oklahoma, but in this slump, a drop, fumble, Jeremy Bernard had a great game. So they're able to get more people involved. Got some of the big fellas, the tight ends involved. So,
the big dogs eat.
Yeah. It's not pretty, but they're making it happen. They won this game. It's a rivalry game, so I'm not going to take too much into consideration on like the margin of victory. They covered the spread. Defensively, bend not break. Couple of good plays out there. A couple of dumb penalties that progressed them down the field in times that it shouldn't have.
Yeah, definitely a couple dumb penalties in this game. But you talked about their defense. What their defense was able to do, that stood out to me, was just containing Jarquez Hunter, only 56 yards on the day. That has been a big piece for them. Peyton Thorne was still, like you mentioned, was able to kind of hit some of these open routes. I remember at one point I saw a big Keandre Lambert-Smith, catch right in the middle, putting them in a spot to where they could drive to score. And so they were able to kind of pick apart this defense a little bit, but the rushing that as Auburn has leaned on was not really able to kind of get going like they have in past games. So I think, Thornton had about 10 carries and, despite Jarquez Hunter having 13 carries, I mean, he only got 56 yards.
Yeah. And I was worried about that coming into this game with some injuries to the linebacker core. Were they going to be able to contain Jarquez Hunter? And the safeties did great. The DB room as a whole at Alabama has really stepped up from the back of the beginning of the year to now, and helping out and kind of keeping things in front of them. So right now, it's Alabama, Auburn. Alabama's kind of been the big brother to this team for the past, 5 years or so. But right now, Alabama's trying to get to the playoff. I don't know if it's going to happen. I don't know if they're deserving, but we'll see. They're sitting probably right on the outside, right on the inside, kind of depending on what happens here on championship week.
We'll see what the committee thinks, right? I think if it was a 2-loss Alabama team, I think they're in, like, no doubt, like, no debate. With the 3 losses and the other 2-loss teams sitting there, and it seems to be Miami, I think that's where we'll see where they find themselves. And of course, South Carolina, I mean, that other 3-loss team that's gained a lot of steam, that's been kind of competing for what seems to be that last spot in the playoffs outside of the conference champs, and some of these teams that we believe are in as well.
Yeah, Alabama, South Carolina, Miami. Then, if Clemson wins the ACC, then you got SMU sitting there. Do they stay even though,
Yeah.
other teams were off that weekend? It's
BYU's 10 and
interesting.
2 too. So,
Yeah.
they're not part of the conversation. I don't know what All-State in terms of their playoff predictor thinks, but BYU's sitting there at 10 and 2 as well.
Yeah, they're at 15%, South Carolina 21, Miami 24, Alabama 30. So Alabama's the favorite of those teams to get in. Just probably based on resume, Miami not really having a strong
Marquee.
win.
Yep.
Yeah, marquee win. South Carolina doing great, having wins, but losing that head-to-head to Alabama, I think, is the one thing holding them back.
Yep.
In that one, BYU, I don't know if they have just the marquee matchup, and it would be SMU.
Yeah, those would be the teams in terms of who they beat and kind of how they rank. I mean, BYU has one of the stronger wins with SMU, but they don't have a stronger schedule from a SOS schedule, right? Or from the schedule perspective. Miami doesn't have any ranked wins right now, and obviously played some ranked teams in the past with Louisville. So we'll see if they get back in the rankings. And Alabama, has the brand, they have the wins. Missouri's helping them. Georgia's helping them. Georgia winning, it was huge. It's one of those things I was texting him, like, if you're a Bama fan, you're like, oh, I don't know if I like Georgia, but you're kind of like, I need them to win this game to help, with your resume.
Yeah. It's they win, help your resume. If they lose, you need them to lose out because you don't want them to lose and then win the SEC and then take another spot. Or it's all just, who do you root for? But, Alabama right now, along with Ohio State, they're the only teams that have 2 wins against top 15 teams.
Yep.
So both Alabama with 3 losses, Ohio State with 2. I don't know. We could go down the rabbit hole again. We talked about this for like an hour and a half before we started here. So we'll save it until we see what they think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's rivalry week rundown. I mean, there's a couple other games we have left to hit here. The Florida State took place that evening alongside Texas and Texas A&M. I know we haven't talked about Texas versus Texas A&M, but the Florida State game, it was pretty close in the first half. Florida was able to pull away. Just a really pitiful season for Florida State. I think you finished the season 2-9, and obviously not where you saw yourself. For Florida, you got a solid foundation with Ball. Lagway played an okay game. It wasn't an amazing game, but I think he had 1 or 2 touchdowns. What were your thoughts when watching this game? And was there anything you were looking for in particular if you were watching it or had it on the side screen?
For DJ Lagway, it wasn't his best game, but I think we could probably say that for any quarterback at some point this year. He didn't necessarily need to do it. The running backs played great.
Yeah,
the defense played great. That's the key for this Florida team is that if they had a guy like Lagway underperforming, I'm not going to say he had his worst game, but he just couldn't get the receivers as involved as they probably wanted. You had the running back step up, but you had the defense step up even more. 8 sacks on the day, but even better, 8 fumbles. Florida State put the ball on the ground 8 times, lost 5, so it's not as bad, but still, right. I mean, Florida defense was on fire.
Right. The defense was incredible. I mean, that's got to be a record, 8 fumbles. I mean, that's something you see at the JV level. Yeah. And that's more speaking to what Florida's defense is able to do and less Florida State's abilities. A little bit of Florida State's abilities. Montrell Johnson had a great game. I think this might be one of his last games in his career. I want to say he's a senior. I don't know if he's a redshirt senior or just a regular 4-year, but 99 yards in the day, that big run for them to, put them in the end zone. And, Florida gets to hold this rivalry dub and feel good about a 7-5 season. If I was Florida, I would feel really good about where we're going in the future and what this program is going to do with wins over LSU and Ole Miss in this season.
Yeah, I mean, you crushed the Vegas win total. One of the hardest schedules in college football. I think one of the, if not the hardest schedule in college football. And they performed above expectations. You got some young guys out there too, so they'll be looking good for the future.
They'll be looking good for the future. I'd love to see this team play Texas next year with Archer, play A&M with Marcel Reed or whoever they put at quarterback, play Miami again without Cam Ward, or even play that game again this year with the way Florida's been playing football. I mean, those are games that could go a different way. And, the SEC's undefeated in hypotheticals, but it would be great to see those matchups again with Lagway and this core team they built here.
Yeah. Oklahoma, LSU. I took Oklahoma before this game, so I had to eat my words a little bit. LSU, won by 20. Yeah. I know. Good game from us.
Yeah. Nuss played well. They were showing the graphics in terms of how he's performed in this season compared to Jaden Daniels last year, and Burrow's numbers were just gaudy. I mean, he had over 5,000 yards, but Nuss played a pretty good game in this one. Lacey was able to get involved as well. It still feels bittersweet, I would imagine, for LSU fans. It was one of those you just want to win. Your goals that you wanted to hit were not fully there.
Yeah, a little bit of slide to end the year. Both teams are bowl eligible. You're kind of just playing for pride at this point. So it's good for LSU to win. But yeah, the momentum, the air was kind of taken out of the tires at this point in the season, and you're just kind of like,
yeah, on the Oklahoma side, I feel like the story has been where do they go now at the quarterback position? It seems with some of the interviews with Jackson Arnold, I don't know if you saw those. The way that they asked him a question on if he plans to be there next year, and I'm paraphrasing, but it seemed like he was saying like he'd like to be back. It's really just going to be depending on how the offseason goes. Oklahoma is looking for a new OC. There's been rumors they're looking at the Washington State OC. And Washington State has a really good quarterback as well, and John Mateer they could potentially bring in. Do you stay with Jackson Arnold? Does Jackson Arnold want to stay?
I think.
What are your thoughts?
I think they stay with Jackson Arnold. I think that they need to change their game plan a little bit, because in this game, just like Alabama, they're asking Jackson Arnold to be the guy to do it all. And it works sometimes it doesn't. And I don't think if you're looking to make the jump to the next level, you want to be the have to do it all guy with a beat up wide receiver room. I think I don't remember who it was. An Oklahoma receiver entered the portal today or put his name out there that he was going to be entering the portal. Mm-hmm. So unless you can build a better receiver room that's hopefully stays healthy next year, because you can't predict those things. It's a tough environment for a guy to succeed in and be able to put himself on display. So I think that they should go back with him.
I think they should too. And that's kind of been Oklahoma's strong suit, right? You have CeeDee Lamb in the past. You got Marquise Hollywood Brown. Having strong wide receivers has always been their brand. And obviously Venables brings in his defensive brand. But from this year, you would want to give more help to Jackson Arnold. And ideally, you can retain some of the receivers, maybe bring in a big transfer guy to help just lighten that load. And even on the rushing side, right? Like DeMarco Murray's a running back coach, could probably bring in some more quality running backs in order to kind of, give some more support to Jackson Arnold. So he was in a no man's land position. So bringing him back or him wanting to come back is probably a double-edged sword, right? Like he's probably going to be evaluating his options as a 5-star Oklahoma native who could potentially blossom in other places, seeing what Dylan Gabriel's been able to do in Oregon or other places like that allow him to run and give him some opportunities to pass with quality wide receivers.
Yeah, and teams know it's going to be tougher to develop a new guy. It's easier to bring somebody in at this point in the way that college football is going. You get a freshman in there, if you're not giving them snaps right away, you don't know if they're going to stick around. So,
right.
Yeah, it's always an opportunity to bring in somebody new.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, if I was Oklahoma, I'd want to keep him. I no doubt. Like if you're listening to this and you're an Oklahoma fan, we appreciate you. I would keep him. I'm curious what they're going to do, and I'm curious what he's going to do. But tough loss this season. Danny Stutzman played well in this game. One of the legends there for them. And so LSU comes out with the win. And then lastly, Texas versus Texas A&M. The Aggies, gig them, them horns, hook them. Sarkisian had his way in this one. The story of this game to me was came down to 2 points: defense and just abysmal play calling in terms of some of these fourth down situations. You left 6 to 14 points on the board between not converting on 2 fourth downs and then also not going for the field goal, right? Like that was the main takeaway for me when I think about this game for Texas A&M.
I mean, no offensive points from A&M. I mean, that's kind of crazy. Like a team, and really the team, and I think the inflection point and the turning point for this team was the Le'Veon Moss injury. Him going out for the year. The team from that point on in that game looked different.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what shifted. And the defense for Texas holding strong, but it felt like there were opportunities for A&M to get points that they left on the table because of play calling. I don't think it was a lot of Marcel Reed's fault. I'm already seeing a lot of discourse online about who do you go with next year? Do you have Wegman again? Do you have new guys? Bring in somebody new? And I think that might be an overreaction to the game, but it's a tough one.
It's a tough one, right? Especially you're looking at, the playoff is right in sight. The conference championship appearance is right in sight. It wasn't Marcel Reed's best game. I don't think it's fully on him. They asked a lot of him, but it just the passing game couldn't get going effectively. I don't know if that's on the OC. They have Colin Klein, former Kansas State head coach or Kansas State quarterback, not head coach. Kansas State, legend there. I think you open the competition up a little bit. I think Marcel's your starter to go, but I think you open the competition and outside of Weckman as well, personally. Because you find yourself in a spot where you went 7-5 last year, you went 8-4 this year. It was a sexier 8-4, but you went 8-4. In the same spot.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, you went from Jimbo, spent some money to get him out of there. You bring in Elko, and it's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't. I'd say that's a little, to me. It's not the same. Yeah, it's a better looking 8-4 than the.
You got the quality LSU win. You beat Florida with Graham Mertz, who was good. You played close. You played Texas close. This is one of the best Texas teams. And on the Texas side, my boy Arch Manning got in there. That boy Slime, you already know that, and he got him a nice little Russian tutty. I'm curious what they're going to do with him in the playoffs when they get in. Right? Do you have more packages for him to run?
Yeah, I think he's more of a threat to Georgia right now than Ewers is. I think there was some. It looks like there was a little bit of limited ability with Ewers. And he gave the only points, a couple turnovers there in the third. He gave the only points to A&M. I think that there's opportunity to go with Archer to bring him in certain times in that game because we know that quarterbacks who can use their legs are a little bit more, bring a little bit more to the table versus a team like Georgia. Kirby Smart even said it at one point when they were playing them earlier in the season. He's like, Arch got a little bit more with his legs now. Like, he can get out and scramble. You got to keep an eye on it.
You do. You definitely do.
Wisner also had a great game on the ground. So you have this kind of two-pronged Russian attack if you go with someone like Arch. That's a little bit of a kryptonite to Georgia.
Definitely a little bit of kryptonite to Georgia. I mean, Quintavion Wisner, I put in my notes, he's him. He's got 186 yards, 5.6 yards a carry on 33 carries. I mean, he absolutely played really well this game. They didn't ask too much from Quinn, but when a play needed to be made, he made it. Matthew Golden as well led the day for the receiving core. Love to see the Houston standout transfer ball out. And so for Texas, you look good going to the conference championship. Your playoff spot looks punched. If you win, you win the SEC. If you lose, you're still in. You can't lose any worse than you did last game. So I feel like they're in a pretty good spot going into this one for Texas. Any thoughts for Texas or for A&M?
I mean, Texas defense is killer. I think that some of the defensive way that the Georgia Texas game went earlier, where the Georgia's defense was the one putting a ton of pressure on Texas. I think that this game could be a little bit flipped when we see them this weekend. We mentioned it earlier, Texas 1.5 point favorites. So Texas seems to be improving. I'm glad they finally got a marquee win under the belt. We'll see if it stays ranked. I guess probably not, but the resume doesn't matter at this point. Texas is locked.
The resume doesn't matter as much at this point. I mean, the AP doesn't have A&M ranked. We'll see what the CFP does. The CFP typically differs a little bit. And, I think that kind of wraps up the rivalry week rundown, our reactions and the playoff implications for the SEC. Great week of football in the SEC. Bittersweet, just cherishing it all last week in the regular season. So many good games from Thursday to Friday to Saturday, right? And so the next segment we have is our power rankings. We'll breeze through this one and just talk through, after we've seen all the football, everyone's taken all their exams. There's one team with an extra credit exam, or two teams with a extra credit SEC championship. Who do we think are the top 16 teams in the conference, and how do we rank them here at the new SEC podcast?
Yeah, and there's some points not points of contention, but some points where one team could be higher than another. And I think starting right off at the beginning, having Texas and Georgia at 1 and 2, some people may have these flipped in different orders because of the head-to-head win that Texas had, or Georgia had over Texas. I think right now the defense for Georgia has slipped a little bit since that game. The defense for Texas has got better. I think right now Texas is playing a little bit better football than Georgia, even though they've played a little bit of a lesser level of competition this year. So that's kind of where I was sitting at, putting them at 1 and 2.
Yep. I think I'm right there with you, right? Like, because of Texas's defense, the offense doesn't have to do as much. We saw that in the Kentucky game. We saw that in the Vanderbilt game. We saw it in the Florida game. I mean, the Florida game, the offense did a lot, right? Quinn had 5 touchdowns, but the defense is allowing this Texas team to not have to score as much. I'm really positive in what I see with Gunnar Helm as well. Kind of leading this team from a passing perspective for Texas. And so I agree, Texas at number 1. The team at number 3 might surprise some people, or it might not. The South Carolina Gamecocks, 6-0 in their last 6 games. Big win over number 12 in the AP at the time, Clemson. They're rocking and rolling. They look more impressive to me than a lot of teams in this conference from the way they're playing right now.
Yeah, I think that they could be 1 or 2. Honestly, had they not had some bad losses, the bad loss to Ole Miss, the loss, close loss to LSU, close loss to Alabama. I think from the quarterback play standpoint, I'm not sure there's many teams who wouldn't trade for Lenore Sellers. Like, he's a guy who's excelling, exceeding expectations and pushing this team up the ranks. They're fighting for a playoff spot. I got them at 3, even though they beat Alabama, or even though Alabama beat them, even though Ole Miss beat them. I think right now the surge that the South Carolina team has is pretty unstoppable.
It's definitely really unstoppable. I mean, and they beat an A&M team more impressively than Texas did. I'm not a huge proponent of style points or the score, but they looked more impressive against A&M than Texas did. Texas looked good as well. This rushing attack has not been able to be slowed down by, Vanderbilt, by Missouri. In a normal year in the SEC East, we would get to see them play Georgia, and I would love to see that game, right? But for right now, they're sitting at number 3 in our power rankings. That 3rd spot is kind of the spot that the committee has had be reserved for a playoff team from the SEC, including the top 1 and 2. And so if it was coming from this, they might be in. But Tennessee's sitting at 4 for us. Tennessee had one of their most complete performances against Vanderbilt this past week. They looked pretty impressive against UTEP. They're rocking and rolling. They're doing what they have to do.
Yeah, there's no team behind them that I would put in front of them. They have the head-to-head win over Alabama. I think that, when the offense is playing well from the passing game, they have, one of the best running backs in the conference. They have a killer defense. They're a great team. I think the only reason they're behind South Carolina is that they've had some incompleteness at times. But yeah, they're ahead of Alabama. Alabama at 5 may even surprise some people because of some of the losses. When Alabama is kicking, they're a tough team to play against. They have their faults, and I think a lot of that comes with the first-year coach. A lot of it comes with, some people might criticize having a running back at quarterback. But I think 5 is a good spot for them. They're sitting right on the fringe of the playoff and having an opportunity to make it.
Yeah, and 5 is a great spot, right? It's tough. They typically would play, if you're looking at our rankings here, they would play 7 and 8 most years. I keep going back to the SEC West, SEC East. Like, they would typically play Ole Miss and A&M, and you could get a good gauge. And they don't normally play Florida. Florida was always SEC East. But they've looked pretty impressive. They looked more impressive in the Auburn game, of course, than they did against Oklahoma. When they are able to play that effectively when it comes to rushing, they're able to win, right? And so, I think that 5 is justified. You can make a case for Florida. I don't know if you can make a case for Ole Miss. I think you can make a case for Florida from a power rankings perspective.
Yeah, and our rankings are, if you're looking at our numbers, Alabama at 5, they've played 2, 3, and 4. They've beat 2, beat 3, lost to 4. So they've had a pretty tough gauntlet of teams to face. They've lost some bad games, but they've won some good ones as well. So that's where that's coming from. Florida at 6. That might also surprise some people because there's some head-to-heads behind them. But again, just like South Carolina, it's kind of recency, and it's based on a player. It's based on DJ Lagway propelling this team. Still hasn't lost a game as the starter.
Still hasn't lost a game as a starter, and this whole team has a new spark to it. We talked about it earlier about the defensive performance in this last game. This defense has been able to step up more effectively this season. That has kind of been a pillar for them. And then on the rushing attack, we always talk about it with Johnson and Ball. Key wins over Ole Miss and LSU to me are the main signal callers, and there hasn't been any drop off. Like, a lot of teams in the SEC this year, they'll play really impressive against top teams, and they'll drop off against, a Mississippi State or against a more inferior opponent. Florida hasn't done that since they've been on this run. And so to me, that's why I find them at 6.
Yeah. Yeah. And playing that game against Ole Miss, I think for that game, I would probably put Ole Miss at 5, Ole Miss at 7 now. The offense hasn't clicked at certain times. They've had some bad losses on the resume, Kentucky being one of those. So that's why I got them there. Why we put them at that spot. A&M at 8, coming off of the rivalry week loss.
Yeah, and we didn't do this last week with after them losing to Auburn. If it was just the Auburn loss, they might find themselves at 6, right? Because they had already beat Florida, right, this season, and they, of course, they didn't play Ole Miss. That Auburn game, and then this performance against Texas, and just kind of including the performance against South Carolina, it's kind of exposed the formula of how to beat A&M. Slow down the rush. Don't let Marcel Reed beat you in the air. Control the ball, right? And so for me, that's why A&M finds themselves at 8. Still competitive. Obviously, they beat Missouri, so Missouri's at 9, but tough to put them higher than 8, given the football we've seen the past couple games.
Yeah, and Missouri at 9 is one that some people might have higher. The CFP likes them high. They like to rank them. They got another win this week against Arkansas. They play good football at times. They have good weapons. They have a good rushing attack. I think the part of their poor stretch from performance came from some injuries. That was right when Brady Cook was banged up. So had that not all happened, some of those games might have gone a little differently.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that it's a potential that could have gone differently. Those games we saw for number 9 in our power rankings. Tough game against Alabama at 5. Tough game against South Carolina, but close. You played South Carolina a lot closer than some of these teams have played them the past couple weeks. We didn't get to see Missouri play Georgia this year, in SEC East fashion. Didn't get to see them play Vanderbilt, but good season for them. It's a clean 9-3, and that's kind of what it is for them. 10, we got LSU. I think this is probably the biggest surprise of the season, where LSU is at, given where they started in early in the season.
Yeah, they're winning games against some inferior opponents. They had some extra games that they probably could have lost. The South Carolina game being one of those. Ole Miss
Even
game
the Ole
being
Miss
another
game.
one of those.
Yeah, Ole Miss as well. Yeah.
So the season could have actually looked a lot worse before. I think it could have looked any better. So that's kind of where they're at. The slide at the end of the year hurt them. Vanderbilt at 11 as well, right behind them. Magic early on, the Magic kind of fell out. They kept themselves in a lot of games, but they,
And for Vanderbilt, it's still a positive season. Like, I think where you find them, you get a big win over Alabama. You play Texas close. You beat Kentucky. You beat some teams you're supposed to beat. You played South Carolina okay. Vanderbilt makes sense. LSU hurts because Garrett Nussmeier is top 3 in the SEC from a quarterback perspective.
Yeah,
there's no reason you should be 10th in the power rankings. There's no reason you should be standings wise. We can say top 5. There's no reason you should be in this spot with the type of talent you have at the quarterback position, at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, for sure. There's a tough run of teams in there. With Missouri, LSU, I'd say Vanderbilt's above expectations, but Missouri, LSU, and Arkansas are kind of a little bit maybe below where they thought they were going to be. Definitely Missouri, who probably expected to be a playoff team this year.
Yeah.
But Arkansas at 12. We've talked about them at length over the last couple of weeks and over the course of the season, just not playing to the level of potential of the talent that they have on the roster.
Yeah, and look, 11, 12, 13, and 14 have all gotten some key wins over the top 7 or 8 in the conference in terms of the power rankings. It's just, in order to be in that top 8, you got to put together for more than a couple games in the season, and that's where Arkansas only felt like they put it together against some of the G5 competition. And of course, Tennessee, Oklahoma put it together against Alabama, but overall the season just felt like the offense was putzing.
Yeah.
And it was a one-man show. Defensively, it was great, but just you need offense.
Yeah. I mean, they had one of the best third down conversion percentages in the country and fourth down conversion percentages because they just found themselves in these, third and long situations often that they were having to convert because they didn't have a lot of consistency on offense. And Oklahoma at 13 as well. They had the big win over Alabama. I think that their placement in their season has been kind of hindered by injuries and questions around the quarterback position, a lot of switches there. It felt like, I don't want to say throwaway year, but it felt like a season that was just kind of, it had that overhanging shadow of the injuries and just maybe not playing up to potential because of that.
Yeah, you're almost happy the season is coming to an end, so you can get healthy, get the right guys in, just kind of continue to establish the culture. And I think the new OC will help go a long way. Key highlights of the season: you beat Bama. The Texas game could have gone a different way for you. but you beat Bama, so that's probably the main highlight of the season. Auburn, your main highlight is beating Texas A&M, but you've looked a lot better from the beginning of the season. Like the beginning of the season, it was like, is Auburn going to get a conference win? They beat Kentucky, obviously. They played Arkansas close. They lost to Arkansas. It just you wrap up the season. Darko Hunter, one of the all-time rushers at the school, top 3 yards wise. Up there with Bo Jackson, so that's always nice to see for the Philadelphia, Mississippi native. But as a team, expectations weren't that high. They weren't even close to getting met.
No, the expectations were kind of mid-tier and not met. 13 teams in the SEC are bowl eligible. Only these last 3 are not, and the first 13 are is because they kind of beat up on these last 3 teams. Auburn, 5 wins. Didn't they're hanging their hat on the A&M win. Really close one with Oklahoma, but just really not doing what they need to do. If they can hang on to some of the commits that they have coming into the next season, it should be better. But the coaching change hasn't necessarily panned out for them over the last couple seasons like they expected it to.
No, you see some bright spots with Cam Coleman. I'm assuming, KLS is probably looking to graduate here for them. Peyton Thorne showed some moments of positivity. You got to hope that you see more from either, whether it's Hank Brown next year or Deuce Knight, if he stays committed. Saw he was visiting Ole Miss the other day, so I don't know what's happening there. It's flip season, so
him and Caleb Cunningham flipping from Alabama. I know that they might want to go play together at Ole Miss. That would be a huge pickup for them. So
yeah, definitely.
Mississippi State. I think this is another one that maybe is up for debate. Some people might have Mississippi State at 16 and Kentucky at 15. I think that's a box score watching take.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Mississippi State has played better than the record shows. They just have found themselves not able to win football games. But they've played much better than Kentucky has played on the field.
And for me, State makes sense, right? Jeff Lebby's an offensive-minded guy. He's going to bring in more of an offensive focus, and that was a story for them. The defense was not there. You talk about the recruiting class. Mississippi State played more impressive football. Kentucky had a marquee win.
Yeah.
And found themselves close in a couple games, but a lot of games it was just like they looked lost out there to me. So State to me at 15 makes sense.
Yeah, and it's down the stretch too, kind of at the end of the season. I think Mississippi State, when they did go to Van Buren, not that Blake Shapen early on wasn't getting things done or attempting to, but when you went with Van Buren, you saw that life that he brought to the field at times, even in games that they weren't winning, they were still keeping their head up and doing the best that they could. It rounds it out. I mean, there's not too much to say about State and Kentucky at this point, but from the beginning of the year to the end, I guess maybe the biggest faller from where we would have put them to start out the year, I think is LSU probably.
Yeah, LSU is the biggest faller at 10, followed by the second of the 3 Tiger teams in the conference with Missouri. Missouri was sitting at top 6. Florida's 6th in his power rankings. Missouri had a much more favorable schedule. They just couldn't pass their key test. LSU, luck ran out, right? We were talking, week 10? They were playing a game to have sole possession of first place over A&M. Obviously got the word of the day, mollywopped against A&M in that game. Those are the 2 biggest fallers, or not Georgia. I think to me, Florida is the team that has been the most impressive with their schedule and with the pieces that they've had. Most teams that lose a starting quarterback are not going to find themselves at 7-5 on the season.
No, yeah, that helped. I mean,
you
never like to see an injury, but it propelled.
In some ways, helped. Yeah. And Graham Mertz wasn't a bad quarterback. I think if Mertz could come back next year, he would get a job at a different school easily.
Yeah. I mean, I think my biggest riser is South Carolina. I think that's got to be the biggest one for me.
Yeah. It's definitely one of the biggest ones. I mean, Lenore Sellers, he obviously is impressive. And so big props to South Carolina, what they're doing. And it'll be interesting to see what the committee thinks with them and Alabama and all these other teams. Yeah. But we want to hear what you think. So if you're listening to the power ranking segment and you're listening to our full length episode, let us know what you think from 1 through 16. Did we get it right? Is there anybody you think should be above Bama or below Bama? We tried to, get this thing right here.
Yeah.
Put some heart and soul and some brains into this one. To wrap up our rivalry week episode, quickly around the country, what were the most important games you would say when it comes to the playoff implications and just what we saw from Rivalry Week. I would say, of course, the Ohio State one, but maybe I would more say Miami, because Miami is now the team finding themselves on the outside looking in versus what looked to be the ACC getting 2 spots if they would have won.
Yeah, I'd say three major games. I think the Miami Syracuse one was definitely one of the biggest, because now it's what do they do with Miami as a 2-loss team?
Yeah.
I think the Tulane Memphis one
Yeah.
honestly was important, because it means that now UNLV would lock up the Mountain West with a win and get in. So there's not going to be 2 G5 teams getting in over like a Big 12. So now that means the Big 12 is definitely going to get a team in.
Yep.
And then I'd say the last would be South Carolina Clemson. South Carolina taking that game, trying to sit on the fringe. Now Clemson, even though they lost, if they win the ACC, if they're in, if they lose, they're out. It makes an interesting. The whole ACC shakeup is interesting.
The ACC shakeup is very interesting. Clemson looking to kind of steal a bid here. A very close loss for them against South Carolina. That was one of the premier games on Saturday. In the Big Ten, it's like the Michigan-Ohio State win felt big, but when you see the playoff ranking predictions, it doesn't really affect Ohio State getting in, right? They obviously were able to afford a second mulligan because they had that strength of schedule, but still nonetheless a big win for Michigan. You steal the recruits from LSU, you steal a win against Ohio State, you plant your flag on their field. I mean, it's all is up in Ann Arbor for sure.
Yeah, no, it's a big one, just more for pride and recruiting than it is for the playoffs. I mean, it matters as far as, where the placement will be. Ohio State might be seeing themselves in a road game now as opposed to hosting one in Columbus. So it matters for that, but yeah.
Notre Dame, it looked kind of close against USC for a little bit, but I mean, they ultimately clobbered them. I think once they had that interception for 6 in the third or fourth quarter, you knew it was over. They'll finish the season 11-1. Key wins over A&M, Army, Navy, Louisville, and Georgia Tech. So 5 key wins. They're more or less in the playoffs, right? I put in my notes, argue with your mammy. They're pretty much in. So, what are your thoughts on Notre Dame in that game and Rivalry Week?
Notre Dame, man, it's just they need to join a conference. It's all kind of a little BS to me that they schedule what they want. It's all kind of a little soft, a little weak. They lose a game like NIU, and it just doesn't matter. That's more of a result of everybody else not doing what they need to do. But still, I don't like to see it. But they're going to be in there. They'll have a home game no matter what now, because they're off for a week.
Yeah. I'm right there with you on Notre Dame, right? Like, you don't have the pressure of a game where you are losing first place in the conference, or you're losing second place in the conference. You don't have, bottom feeders in the conference who are trying to give you your best shot every week. And you don't have to play in a conference championship. It is not fair. And you decide that you're going to use the ACC as your main conference pool to pick games from. Grow up. Pick some teams from the SEC. Pick outside of A&M. Pick some teams from the Big Ten, right? There's no reason why you can't play Michigan or Ohio State. Michigan's one of the rivals, right? Why can't you play them every year? Miami's a rival. Play Miami every year, right? To me, if you're going to schedule this, and then the committee is showing you that there's no benefit to scheduling a harder schedule. So I'll leave my Notre Dame smack talk, but like I said, argue with your mammy. They're in the playoffs. It's in the notes. It's typed up. The Big 12, Houston played a game against BYU. The implications were, after we saw that Iowa State beat Kansas State to clinch a spot into the conference championship, if Houston would have beat BYU, Colorado would have got in. So unfortunately, after Colorado had a good performance, or fortunately for a lot of people who do not like Colorado, they had a good performance against Oklahoma State, 56-zip. They find themselves on the outside of the conference championship. And looking at the bowl game, I bring up Colorado in that game because Travis Hunter had 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. Where does any changes when it comes to Heisman positioning?
Yeah, there's 2 guys up for the Heisman. In a game like that, one is usually sitting out at that point in the game. The other one's getting thrown 50-50 balls because they're trying to get him the Heisman. I think it's a little backyard footballish to me. Trying to win someone the Heisman, where you have Ashton Genty, who was kind of a clear favorite early on in the season, was still sitting out the second half of games that they're winning.
Right. He could have been playing in games like Portland State early in the season, where he sat after the first half, right? And running up, 250, 300 yards in those type of games.
But no, Travis Hunter will win it. I'm not going to say it's undeserving. I mean, he is a great football player. He'll be great at the next level. He's done a lot for his team. I just think it's tough to see the season that Ashton Genty's had, see running backs that have won it before, and just know what he's done. And if he doesn't win it, it's hard to see when a running back will win it again.
Right.
So it's tough. But
yeah, it is definitely tough. I don't think you can go wrong with either player, right? For people that have watched our dialogue on this a couple weeks ago, I was pretty heavy on the Travis Hunter camp. I still think Travis Hunter is qualified, but if it was Ashton Genty, I think he's also deserving of the award given the records that he's setting against the competition. You have that litmus test of them playing Oregon and him having over 200 yards in that game as well to show that it's not just because of the Mountain West competition. It's because of he's like that.
Yeah.
But
one guy will make the one team will make the playoffs probably, which I think maybe is the trophy that he's vying for a little bit more. So
that's what it seems like, right? And Boise deserves it after all these years.
Yeah.
That's what it seems like. I mean, so top games we talked about in the ACC: Georgia beating Tech. We talked about Clemson going down to South Carolina. Louisville held it down for the conference, taking down Kentucky. We talked about the Big Ten. Oregon took care of business against Washington. Purdue lost to Indiana, 1-10. Indiana's pretty much in. And then we talked about the independent already, Notre Dame and USC. I mean, that was rivalry week in a nutshell. This is the last episode when it comes to the regular season recaps. We're coming to you with some playoff episodes. Don't worry, we're not going anywhere if you're paying attention. Any closing thoughts when it comes to the season, rivalry week, anything around the SEC or around the country?
I think that really wraps it. It's been a good season so far, but there's still a lot of football to be played. We'll talk about the Georgia-Texas game this weekend, a little bit about the other games that are going to be happening. So catch us in that one. And we're also going to be looking forward to seeing what comes out with these playoff rankings too. So it's a fun season.
We got playoff rankings. We got bowl schedules coming out. The portal opens up December 9th. We got conference championships this upcoming weekend. There's no offseason in college football, and it's still in season right now. But thank you for tuning in. This is the new SC podcast. I'm Randall Jr. We got Hunter Zeisman here, and until next time.